All right, so deep divers. Picture this. A world without Macbeth.
Oh, wow.
No Tempest. Not even Julius Caesar.
That's hard to imagine.
Right. Almost happened, though. We almost
Right.
lost those iconic Shakespeare plays.
Really?
And a bunch more. 18 others, actually, that had never even been printed before.
Oh, wow.
They almost just vanished. Poof. Gone.
I had no idea.
So today, well, we're going behind the scenes, kind of a deep dive, of Shakespeare's first folio.
Okay.
It's a book published in 1623, 7 years after he died.
Oh, interesting.
And it's quite a story, let me tell you.
I bet.
Full of, personal connections and financial risks, and even maybe like a touch of royal drama.
Ooh, royal drama. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. So the goal today is to figure out why this book is so much more than just like a collection of plays.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're gonna be going over expert interviews and some historical analysis, and even sprinkle in some fun speculation.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. So first things first, what even is a folio?
Well, so folio wasn't actually like a term they used back then.
Uh-huh.
It only became the first folio after they made more later editions.
Oh, okay.
Basically, folio, it just refers to the size of the book.
Okay, so it wasn't like your average paperback.
No, not at all. Think more like a large format, almost like one of those coffee table books.
Okay.
Big statement piece.
Yeah.
Meant more for a library, not, casual reading.
Yeah, I got it. So kind of like a status symbol almost. And I'm assuming these were pretty expensive back then.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, one expert, they estimated it would have cost like 120 pounds in today's money.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot, especially since plays back then, they were just seen as entertainment,
Yeah.
not, important literature.
Right. So putting this folio together, that was a pretty big move. Both like money-wise, Andy,
Yeah.
like changing how people thought of plays.
Exactly.
So who were these like risk takers?
Yeah.
The people behind it all.
Well, it was a kind of a team effort, right? It was Shakespeare's fellow actors, John Hemmings and Henry Condoler.
Mm-hmm.
And then two guys from the publishing world, Isaac Jaggard, he was the printer,
Okay.
and Edward Blunt, the publisher.
Gotcha. Hemmings and Condell, they were pretty close to Shakespeare, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Not just like, co-workers.
No, definitely more than that. Along with Richard Burbage, they were like key members of Shakespeare's acting company,
Right.
the Chamberlain's Men. They later changed the name to the King's Men.
Oh, right.
And actually, Shakespeare's will, it specifically mentions those three.
Really?
Yeah, he left them money for mourning rings.
Mourning rings, what are those? Like the 17th century version of a friendship bracelet?
Not quite, but mourning rings were definitely a thing back then.
Yeah.
But for him to specifically leave those for them,
Yeah.
that's got people thinking there was maybe like some agreement to protect his work, keep his legacy going,
Oh, wow. So we got the actors, the publishers, this possible agreement. Now, you mentioned royal drama earlier.
Oh, right.
Where does that fit into all of this?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. So the first folio, it wasn't dedicated to King James. Which is weird, right? You'd think a book published by the King's Men, they'd dedicate it to the king.
You'd think so.
So why not? That's the question.
All right, I'm hooked.
It is.
What are the theories?
Okay, well, one theory is this thing called the Spanish match.
Okay.
It was this proposed marriage between King James's son and a Spanish princess.
Ah, okay.
And the Herbert brothers, they were patrons of the folio, and they were very against this match.
Gotcha.
As were a lot of people in the English court.
So if they dedicated the book to the king while all this was going on?
Yeah, it could have blown up in their faces. Big risk.
For sure.
Especially because there's evidence that some of the other people involved with the folio, like the engraver Martin Bruchout, he was Catholic. So potentially sympathetic to Spain.
Wow, so we have like pro-Spanish folks working on the folio, but it ends up dedicated to these anti-Spanish nobles.
Exactly. So some historians, they think maybe there was a last-minute switch.
Oh.
To dedicate it to the Herberts instead.
To avoid like any political backlash?
Exactly. Pretty clever right there.
Yeah, that's a smooth move. Okay, so putting aside all the politics, let's talk about the actual getting it done part.
Sure.
How long did it actually take to print this thing?
Well, it was a long process. Almost 2 years.
Oh, wow.
They started in 1622 and didn't finish until late 1623. And it wasn't, smooth sailing the whole time.
I can imagine.
There were pauses for different reasons. Like, the printing house had other stuff to do. And getting the rights to all the plays, that was complicated.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Were there any other pauses that like, really stick out?
Well, one thing is interesting. During a big break, summer of 1622, the king's men, they went to Stratford-upon-Avon.
Hold on, isn't that where Shakespeare's widow, Anne, lived?
Yes, and officially they were paid not to perform during that time.
So what were they doing there?
Good question. What were they doing in Stratford?
All right, give me some theories.
Well, one historian thinks they might have been looking for Shakespeare's papers.
Oh.
Maybe in Anne's possession. After all, the Folio's intro, it says, they received from him scarcely a blot in his papers.
Wow, that's really interesting. It sounds like we're about to get into some Shakespearean family secrets.
Yeah, so this idea that they were looking for Shakespeare's papers, it's really interesting.
It is, but did they find anything?
Well, no proof, unfortunately, but there is one interesting detail. Anne Shakespeare, she died just a few weeks before the first folio came out.
Oh, wow. Okay, so maybe just a coincidence?
Maybe. But here's the thing. Less than 2 weeks after Anne dies, the king's men, they relicense The Winter's Tale to perform it.
Okay.
And get this. The prompt book for that play, it had been missing.
Okay, hold on. Prompt book. I'm not a theater person. What's that?
Basically, it's the master copy of the script.
Okay. With all the, like, stage directions and cues and notes for the actors.
Ah, so like the control panel for the whole production.
Exactly. So losing it, that was a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
So for it to just reappear right when they want to stage the play again, right after Anne dies.
Makes you wonder.
It does, doesn't it?
It's like maybe that prompt book took a little trip to Stratford-upon-Avon.
Yeah. Maybe Anne had it, and then it came back after she passed.
Whoa. So Anne Shakespeare, possibly involved in this whole thing. That's a game changer. It's not just the men, you know.
It really makes you think, right? Like, how many women were involved in stuff like this back then, but we just don't know about it.
Totally. It's time to shed light on those hidden stories. But speaking of shedding light, let's get back to the folio itself. We know it saved a bunch of Shakespeare's plays, but how did it change how people saw his work?
Oh, that's a great question. Because it really did change things. The first folio, it turned Shakespeare's plays from just performances into actual literature.
So before the folio, people didn't think of him as a great writer. Not in the same way. Plays, back then, they were entertainment. It was poetry and prose that were seen as high literature.
Interesting.
But the folio, it put the plays on that same level.
Made them something worth studying and appreciating.
Exactly.
And that changed how people saw Shakespeare, like, forever.
Right, absolutely. Because the folio gave future generations access to his work.
Right.
And that influenced all the adaptations and really shaped how we see Shakespeare today. Hard to imagine what his legacy would be without it.
Yeah, no kidding. He might just been, like, a good history playwright, not the bard.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, the first folio wasn't the end of the story. There were more editions.
Right, and those tell us about how Shakespeare's popularity grew.
Yeah, and how people thought about authorship back then.
Oh, right. Like how some of the later editions, especially the third folio, they had plays that weren't even by Shakespeare.
Yeah, trying to cash in on his fame by adding more plays.
So they were like putting out Shakespeare fan fiction and saying it was the real deal.
Kind of, yeah. But it shows how different things were back then.
Yeah, so how was it different?
Well, Shakespeare, he collaborated a lot, like many playwrights.
Yeah.
He revised his work, adapted it, constantly changing things.
So it wasn't about saying, like, this is my work and only mine?
No, not really. The idea of a single definitive version of a play, it was much more fluid.
So the folio, it wasn't just preserving the words, it was shaping what we think of as Shakespeare today.
Exactly. And speaking of shaping, we can't forget about how the first folio shaped how Shakespeare looked.
Oh yeah, that famous engraving. The one by Martin Drushout.
Right. Maybe not the most accurate portrait, but it definitely became the image of Shakespeare.
The one that launched 1,000 fridge magnets.
Exactly. It gave people a visual, helped to create that whole, like, cult of personality around him.
It's crazy how powerful one image can be, even centuries later. So we've talked about the making of the folio, its impact on Shakespeare, even how it shaped his image. But there's another part to this story I want to explore. What happened when the first folio went global?
Ah, yes, the folio's world tour. Because copies started traveling overseas, you know, taken by merchants, diplomats, even people running from religious persecution.
Wow, so these books went from a risky investment to traveling the world. That's amazing.
It is, yeah. But this global journey, it has a dark side, too.
Oh, how so?
Well, as the British Empire grew, the First Folio became part of that whole complicated story of colonialism.
Oh, right.
It was seen as a symbol of English culture being superior, a way to spread the English language, and unfortunately, sometimes it was used to suppress other cultures.
Yeah, that's a good reminder that even great art can be part of some pretty dark things.
Right.
So we've gone from the folio's beginnings in London to its impact on Shakespeare, and now its global travels. What does it all mean? What's the takeaway?
I think it shows how powerful Shakespeare's words are, how they've lasted through time and spread across the world.
And that art doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right. Its meaning changes depending on the people who make it, interpret it, even exploit it.
Yeah, it's always evolving, like that text in motion idea.
Exactly. And that brings us to the folio's value today. These books are like treasures now.
Yeah, how much would one cost these days?
Millions. Millions of dollars.
No kidding. Jaggard and Blunt's gamble really paid off, huh? But I bet it's not just about the money for the people who own these books now. There's got to be something else, right?
Oh, definitely. Each first folio, it tells a story.
You mean beyond Shakespeare's words?
Exactly. There are marks from the people who owned it before. Notes, doodles, even like wine stains.
Wow, those little things are like voices from the past. It's amazing to think about all the people who've touched these books.
But there's a kind of irony in how we treat them today.
Like what?
Well, we love seeing those marks from the past.
Yeah.
But now we're too scared to leave our own marks.
Because they're so valuable.
Exactly. They're kept locked away, perfectly preserved, but never really used. Almost like museum pieces, frozen in time.
I get wanting to protect them, but it does make you think, are we missing out by keeping them at such a distance?
That's a good question. One expert even said we should be more daring, more like the readers in the past.
Like how?
Interact with them in new ways.
That's a cool idea. Like a 21st century bookbinding contest or a global first folio reading challenge. That would be awesome. A great way to celebrate Shakespeare's words.
It would be, wouldn't it? Bring those texts to life.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah.
What really stands out for you? Anything you want to explore more?
Well, for me, it's how the folio went from a risky business deal to a symbol of cultural power, both good and bad.
That is pretty amazing. It shows how art is never just one thing, right?
Right. It's always changing, just like our understanding of the world.
That's a great point. And that's what's so great about these deep dives. We learn cool stuff, challenge our ideas, and end up with even more questions.
Yeah, it really makes you think. One book and so many different ideas about it. For me, it's that whole thing with Anne Shakespeare, like, was she really part of it all? Did she help save her husband's work? It's kind of spooky,
And
right?
it really adds a new layer to the story.
Yeah.
And it just shows we still don't know everything about the first folio, how it was made, who was involved.
Exactly. That's what I love about this. We're not just listing facts. We're digging into the mystery, all the things we might never know for sure. But there's one more thing about the first folio I want to talk about. How it shapes how we read and understand Shakespeare today. We've touched on it, but I'm curious, what do you think? How does the folio still affect us?
Well, it's not just a historical thing, you know? It's still a living document. It still affects how we read Shakespeare, how we perform his plays, how we understand them.
How so?
Well, for example, the folio gives us clues about how they staged the plays back then.
Oh, interesting. The stage directions, the punctuation, even how the lines are laid out on the page.
It's like a blueprint for the original productions.
Exactly. And it's easy to forget that when you're just reading the play in a modern book. We think of them as words on a page, but they were meant to be performed, to be seen live EE. And the folio helps us reconnect with that.
It's like that text in motion thing, right?
Right. Even though the folio tried to preserve the words, those words kept changing on stage and in the minds of people reading and performing them.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about Shakespeare and about all literature, really. It's always being interpreted in new ways. Each generation finds new meanings in the words.
It's a conversation that goes on for centuries.
That's beautiful.
And the first folio, even with all its mysteries, it's part of that conversation. It's a connection to Shakespeare's time. Lets us experience his words in a way we couldn't otherwise.
That's a perfect note to end on. This book, it started as a gamble, a way to protect a legacy. And now it's still sparking conversations, making us think, and reminding us how powerful words and stories can be. So next time you're reading or watching Shakespeare, think about the journey those words took. A journey that started with a folio, a risky bet, and a legacy that's still unfolding today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going.